Boa noite. Good evening. My name is Marco Shamlefil. I'm lecturer at the Barbados Community College, Barbados Language Centre. And today we will continue our series in commemoration of 200 years of Brazil's independence with a guest, and it's a recorded session. Our guest here today is Dr. Frederick Aline. Good evening, Dr. Aline. How are you?
Good evening, Marco. I'm fine. Nice to be here.
Okay, Frederick, I will call you Frederick or Fred as I usually call you. Uh,
Of course.
let's let's agree on that. So, Fred, can you tell us who you are, what you do, what did you study, and where you live?
Uh, I I live here in Barbados in Maxwell Christchurch, and study, my thesis was on the Barbadian migration to Brazil and British Guyana. It was a comparative study, and it looked at the migration of Barbadians to those two countries in the between the late 19th century and the early period of the 20th century. And that's what they want to know my interest in, especially in the
Yes,
Brazilian
yes. So that's the
aspect
first
of
thing
the
that
study.
I think that's a very logic question I will ask you right now. So, why did Barbadians decide to leave Barbados and go to British Guyana? And especially today, we will be talking about it. Why did they decide to go to Brazil?
Well, it was a period of Barbadian history when things were really tough in this country. It was right in the period after emancipation, that 100-year period after emancipation was a fairly rough period in Barbados. There was high unemployment, low wages, and of course, the Black population was in very dire straits. And many of them were migrating from Barbados. Barbados had some of the lowest wages in the Caribbean. And the reality was that people needed to find work and they needed to support their families. And they left for many places. And Brazil was one of the places that they migrated to from the late 19th century. Not in large numbers at the very beginning, but like the Panama migration, where you had that significant infrastructural development, the Panama Canal, you also had developments in Brazil. The railway systems were being built around that time. And the investment, much of the construction was being done by American and English investors. And the Barbadians were able to find work on building railway systems and other infrastructural projects in Brazil.
So basically, you're telling us that they were recruited and they found those jobs, and then that's why they went to Brazil. It was not like a movement of people saying, "Let's go to Brazil and see what's there." It was like structured. And they went because of that,
Yes,
right?
yes, it was mainly a structured migration, but in doing my research, I also found that Barbadians for the very early period, right after Brazil had emancipated its own black population, there was evidence that Barbadians were already there within, say, the first decade. And many of them got there because they were working on, again, associated with the British, they're working on merchant ships. So some of them got off in Brazil and and stayed in Brazil. And you find that this has come to our knowledge because some of them ended up in fairly destitute conditions, and we see in the newspapers of the day and in our own records from the period of our colonial history, you see reports of them being repatriated from various parts of Brazil. So that is how we know that Barbadians were there. And the other aspect of the migration was Barbadians going to Brazil to work in domestic service and as governess. Some Barbadians would go to work with British expatriates who wanted nannies for their children. So you find that element of the migration also.
So could that be, I'm a linguist, right? So I'm always interested in that. Could the reason also be there that they went as nannies, and so because of English, because of the language, because they already spoke English and Brazilians wouldn't also?
That's an important point, very important point. And also the fact that these Barbadians spoke English, coming from an English environment, and the English wanted someone who spoke English to work with the children and things like that. You also found that that was also an important element in the recruitment of Barbadians to work in the railway systems, because they spoke the same language as the British and American managers who were in charge of the construction sites. And also the fact that some Barbadians had already worked in this type of construction activity. The railway systems in the Caribbean had already been built. So Barbadians and West Indians had experience in this type of work, and they also had experience, some of them coming from the work in Panama. So they were accustomed to these types of conditions and the type of work needed in building railway systems.
So, yeah, so it was basically skills in general and language skills as well, right?
They had the language skills, and they had the particular type of work experience.
Right. So, Fred, just let's briefly touch on that. It's not our main topic today. You mentioned that they went to Panama for the construction of the canal and also railways, and you said your PhD thesis was a comparison, what you call British Guyana, migration of Bajans to British Guyana into Brazil. Why did they go to British Guyana? Was the same reason as going to Brazil, and what is the biggest difference between those two types of migration?
Well, the Barbadians who went to British Guyana and Barbados have this long migration history, and it began in the very beginning of the emancipation period, and even before, if you have to look at it even further back, because enslaved persons were being taken to Guyana, what became British Guyana, even during the period when it was Dutch. But to focus on your question, as soon as emancipation occurred in 1838, Barbados started moving to British Guyana because there was an abundance of land that they could do independent farming. The wages were better, and much better than in Barbados. And one of the reasons British Guyana at the time, had a developing sugar industry. It was what is called in historical terms, it was a new sugar colony. Unlike Barbados, it was an old sugar colony. So there were significant developments in the sugar industry in British Guyana, and there was room for development in all areas. And of course, in British Guyana, Barbadians could not only possibly get parcels of land that they could do independent farming, but you also had the forestry industries, you had mining, and other things that they could get involved in. In addition, Barbadians with a sound primary education, as we would call it today, Black Barbadians were able to find jobs in the civil service in Guyana. So you had a significant number going into the police force, especially the police force, which by the 1880s was 80% Barbadian. And you also had them working in lower level positions. But and the connection significant with Barbados, with Guyana and Brazil, was that many Barbadians who went to Guyana, some of them found their way through the Guyanas. And when I say the Guyanas, I mean like Suriname, French Guyana, Cayenne, and there were shipping routes going. Of course, you're now on the South American continent. So it was basically fairly easy to get shipping transport to go over to Brazil. So it was it's all on the road to Brazil. If you wanted to move from Guyana, you move from Guyana into Brazil.
Interesting. So, but it all was done via ship, so to say, not via land because of the dense Amazon forest, I guess.
Yes. More than likely, it would have been virtually, I wouldn't say impossible, but it would have been much more difficult. But the newspapers that we have available to us, which give us a fairly good idea of shipping routes, show that many ships converged at Barbados, and then they went off to F those Barbadians that wanted to go directly from Barbados to Belém, for instance, in Brazil. It was fairly easy if you wanted to go direct from Barbados to Belém. But a lot of these ships also passed through Georgetown and other ports on the northern South American rim, and then went off to Brazil. So there were good shipping connections.
Okay, yeah, that's just interesting. So, actually, I think we should, Fred, show a map now for people who have an idea what we are talking about. We had, actually, first of all, before I continue here, I should have said at the very beginning, I will say it now here, but also I will mention at the end as well. It's not related directly to the presentation, but connected to the presentation, yes. As I said at the beginning, today, exceptionally, we are recording the session. It's not live. So, yes. And usually we have a space at the end for people to ask questions. That unfortunately will not happen today, but this here will be available as a YouTube link, and it will be open for you in the comment session to ask questions. If you have any doubts about this presentation, you can ask questions in YouTube as a comment, and Fred and I, we will try to answer those questions later if you have any questions. So drop them in the comments of the YouTube link. Okay, and we will later then see if we can answer it, right? So coming back to this, I will now show a map of Brazil, just simply a Google map, right? And here we go. So we have here Google Maps, we have here Barbados, right? And we have here Georgetown, what today is Guyana, and those days British Guyana, right? Let me just move this here a little bit. So you're saying those Barbadians, they would go obviously down to Panama here and down to Guyana. And then the obvious way they would take, you mentioned as well, we are now Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana, and we have here Brazil, the north of Brazil. So you're saying first place, obviously it looks almost like a gate to the Atlantic for the north of Brazil, big city of Belém. So they would arrive there. So this, you're telling us this was the first place Barbadians settled down. Did they go somewhere else as well? And tell us, what did they do in Belém?
Well, in Belém, we found that Belém went through a period, as you know, Marco, of significant infrastructural development. And it is one of the more well-planned Brazilian cities. And while I was able to visit in Belém, one of the things you see are the significant amount of foliage in the city. All the mango trees lining the streets, the nice avenues and everything else. And Barbadians participated in some of this infrastructure development. There's the Barranca railway that was built in Belém, and evidence suggests that Barbadians worked on that railway. And as I mentioned earlier, there were other there was a lot of rebuilding going on in Brazil, in Belém. So the Barbadians participated in this, and then you had the development in the interior. What we will see on the map is Portobello.
Okay, and, so let's see. This is obviously, again, let's keep the perspective. We're talking a distance like this here, okay, that I'm pointing to, this is about 100 kilometers, right? So you're saying
Yes.
Barbadians went from Belém, and then obviously the rivers in the Amazon, they worked, and they still work today as highways, so to say. So the cities are connected not by highways, but by riverways, right, so to say. And they would go from Belém into here,
And
the
down the
mighty
Amazon.
Amazon River up along Santarém, reaching Manaus in the state of Amazonas, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then
And I should
you're
mention
talking,
also,
yes,
I should also mention Manaus as one of the areas where the Barbadians also found themselves. So you all along that that Amazon highway, as you mentioned, you and Manaus is another significant city along that river, and
yeah. So
all the way they went.
if I zoom out, actually, you see here Manaus, and Manaus is, so to say, more or less the hub that connects
Yes.
people from all over the north of Brazil. They meet in Manaus when they are coming along the rivers, and so Manaus works like a commercial hub today. It's a big port, a significant port for the north of Brazil. And then you're saying from Manaus, they would also go as far as down here, Porto Velho. As you see, Porto Velho is also connected by the river to the Amazon, right? So let me zoom in. So Porto Velho is in the state of Rondônia, right? And why did they go so far?
Well, at the time, there was development of a railway that would bring rubber. And when we speak of rubber, we are speaking of natural rubber, which was produced from the trees in the Amazon. And this rubber was produced in that general area. Now, I will explain also, and persons familiar with the map of Brazil would know that Porto Velho is fairly close to Bolivia. Close
Right. So
as
see Bolivia here, right?
close as, yes, close as a Brazilian close, not a Barbadian close, but relatively close in Brazilian terms. And at one point, part of that area closer to the Bolivian border was annexed by Brazil. So an agreement between Brazil and Bolivia would be that this route, this railway would be built so that rubber produced in Bolivia, and of course one also produced in the area of Porto Velho, can be shipped down the Madeira River to the Atlantic Ocean, joining the Amazon River to the Atlantic Ocean, because Bolivia is landlocked. It doesn't have a sea coast. So for the interior of Brazil, of Bolivia, to get its rubber out, it had to use a route along the river systems over to the Atlantic side of South America. So that was the reason for building the river.
Bolivia is usually known like for the Andes and so, but also one part of Bolivia, as it is from Peru and Colombia, is Amazon, right? So Bolivia also has Amazon forest areas in the lowlands at the border with Brazil, especially the states of Acre and Rondônia. Yes, so that was the idea. So Barbadians went there to build the railway that would allow the export of latex, of rubber from trees, right? I have here, Frederick, your PowerPoint. I don't know if you want to show something from there. I have it here. I don't know.
Well, maybe. Well, if you look at this first illustration here, you see here a Barbadian with three of the indigenous people of the Amazon, but in Peru. So there is also a connection between Peru and the presence of the Barbadians in that sector of Brazil, which we just spoke about, Portobello, because Barbadians were also in other parts of South America working on railway systems also, but this particular situation in Peru happened because we had this situation where Barbadians were recruited to work on rubber plantations in Peru, and they went there to work not to harvest rubber, but more like enforcers, as we would call them. They were the persons who would guard the rubber plantations and help to ensure that the indigenous people did what they were supposed to do. And a famous, I should stress that the indigenous persons were not treated very well. And then the Barbadians also found themselves being harshly treated by the rubber plantation owners also. So it came to the notice of the British Council, as you would imagine that the Barbadians were British subjects. So they complained to the British Council in Brazil, and they wrote a letter in 1911 to the Advocate newspaper complaining about their harsh treatment in Peru. And they ended up, some of these people who were repatriated from Peru ended up in what we know as Portobello today. So there's a connection also between what was happening in other parts of the Amazon basin and the Barbadians in Portobello. So those were some of the migrants that came over also, in addition to the ones who came directly from Barbados to Portobello.
I see. So you have some more slides here. You want to show some specific ones here?
Okay.
And comment on them?
Yes, the Barbadians who went to Brazil and to Peru, some of them were recruited in Barbados. So we have evidence of this in what I call the commonly called the Panama Registers here in Barbados. And so you see occasional references, not many, of the Barbadians who were recruited by agents, labor agents in Barbados, and went directly to work especially in Portobello, to work on the building of the railway. Yeah, so that is how we have that documentary evidence of their presence. But I would add that considering the amount of people who worked in Brazil on the railway, we don't have a significant record of their names here in Barbados. What I was able to do in doing the research, when I looked at the postal records, I had a better idea of the amount of work, because there were thousands and thousands of pieces of mail going between Barbados and Brazil. I don't remember how much thousand pieces of mail went over the period, but a significant amount of mail. And then you had also a significant amount of parcels, people sending back parcels of gifts for their families back in Barbados. And so we have an idea of the numbers. A historian here, Alexander Hoyos, he wrote, I think it's about, he mentioned maybe about 5,000 Barbadians who worked in Brazil. The numbers are conflicting, no matter, I've been able to look at some numbers from Brazil also, but numbers are conflicting. And we see this in many of our studies on migration, whether it's Panama or Brazil or Guyana. What has happened is that people chose in many ways to go independently to various places and did not necessarily use the agents. So they heard that the people can make some money in Brazil, and they book a passage, took a boat from Barbados, and went off to Brazil, went off to Belém. Okay, So
Okay.
there was no record of that. We don't have any shipping records saying, well, look, these people were going there. But we do know they were there because of evidence like the postal records. And of course, you have the evidence like the mail notices. You see here, mails to New York, and ships going between Para, Brazil, which is Manaus. So you see this link between New York all the way down to Brazil. Ships were going and coming. Barbados was also a coaling station. So steamships that were passing, they were refuel here at Barbados. So connections between Brazil and Barbados were very good. And so what we can say is that thousands of people, we don't know how many, took the opportunity to go to Brazil at the height of the building of the railway, especially for the Madeira, as the Madeira Mamoré Railway. They took the opportunity to go and to work in Brazil. And many of them eventually settled in Brazil and had families. So we have this fairly vibrant Barbadian community in Brazil.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to come back to that a bit later as well. Let's first have a look at those slides. Do you want to comment on some others?
Yes, you have. Well,
this
one, the next one should be interesting. I'm sure many Barbadians are not aware of how natural rubber was collected. So you see here, I took this photo in a park in Portobello, and you see how the trunk of the rubber tree is scarred, and at the bottom, I think I have that, but at the bottom there's a bucket, and as the sap runs out of the bark of the tree, it is captured in a bucket.
Okay, perhaps. All right. Let's see if we are lucky and we find it fast. Yeah, I think this is how it works. So like here, for example, you can get like this picture here. And this shows how it is collected.
Yes.
More or less, right? So for you to have an idea, there's a little bucket and it collects the sap, which is later cooked, if I'm not wrong, right? And to become rubber. So let's come back to this. So, yes, so and then
before we go,
yes?
Before we go to the next slide, what I should also state is, and for those Barbadians who will be looking at this this video, there was the Barbadian historian, Sir Alexander Hoyos, and we know the Hoyos family here in Barbados. His father, Alexander's father, met a Barbadian working in the Brazilian, in the Amazon jungle, and they became friends, and the Barbadian invited Sir Alexander's father to visit. Tell me, why not visit Barbados? So he visited Barbados, and eventually he brought his family here to Barbados. So Sir Alexander's family originally came from Peru, but his father was working as a rubber trapper in the Amazon, and met this Barbadian in the Amazon. So that is how that family came to be in Barbados. It's a very interesting little story. So, yes, so yes. The other slide shows us the rubber all packed and ready for ship. So this is how it was then compressed, wrapped, and ready for shipment. And of course, it would have been, from at this point, it would be put on boats and shipped down the Amazon and the Madeira rivers down to Belém to be exported to various parts of the world. Those were the days when they did not have what we know as rubber which is petroleum based, but this was natural rubber, and this was heavily used in those days before vulcanization was discovered. The other point that would be important here is that Barbadians also appear at a place called Fortlandia in Brazil, where Henry Ford, who we consider to be the person who revolutionized the automotive industry in the world, Henry Ford had an idea that he would develop a rubber plantation in a place in Brazil called Fortlandia. And Barbadians were also present at this development. And there's evidence that shows the Barbadians, because he tried to develop a kind of an American type town in the jungle. He had all the whole American culture he transported, the style houses, everything. The way people ate food, everything that he could think of American, he installed in the jungle. And it clearly did not suit the climatic conditions in the Brazilian jungle. And the Barbadians, along with the Brazilians, they ended up with a significant conflict about the food and other conditions at Fortlandia. So we have that evidence also of the Barbadian presence at Fortlandia. And so Barbadians appear in various places in Brazil during that time.
Okay, yes, interesting. So, can we go to some other slides here?
Yes,
to show?
you have one there with the conditions of work that the Barbadians experienced, and we can see the very marshy wet conditions. And as I mentioned earlier, Barbadians to some extent would have been somewhat accustomed to this type, these working conditions, because they had to work in similar conditions in Panama when they were building the canal. Wet, mosquitoes, all types of diseases, tropical diseases would have been present. And we would see in the agricultural reporting newspaper of the day that the authorities here in Barbados, even though we see evidence of recruiters being present in Barbados and recruiting Barbadians, you are also seeing warnings that Barbadians should not go to Peru or to Brazil to work. Because in one quote from the newspaper, they said that some very hearty Germans did not survive the ordeal of working in the jungle here with the Madeira Mamuera Railway, because people were recruited from all parts of the world. And I don't have my notes here with me right now, but this particular attempt to build the Madeira Mamuera Railway was about I think the third attempt. And this one succeeded, but the others failed mainly because of the conditions that people experienced in the jungle. And people died off, very easily in those conditions. And Barbadians, I should also mention again, because these attempts to build this railway, the ships that were carrying the person from the United States to work on the railway, they had stopped in Barbados years before. So there was an understanding that there was work available in Brazil. So Barbadians were not oblivious to what was happening in Brazil. They knew there was work there because the sailors came off and they had a good time in Bridgetown. All of that is documented, and we well known is well known to persons who research this. So Barbadians were aware that there were opportunities in Brazil to work. So these were the conditions, and an interesting part of this also was that malaria, things like malaria and all these diseases were, as I said, were present in the jungle. But Barbadians took their own traditional healing methods to Brazil also. And I was able to find, when I was in Brazil, a little poetry book that spoke of the Barbadians using things, and Marco, you may not be familiar with this, but there's something here in Barbados called Cersei bush. Now, the Barbadians were using Cersei bush as a treatment for malaria in Brazil.
Okay.
So I found this in a little poetry book that a poet in Portobello gave to me. And he mentioned the different types of bush, what we call bush teas, that we use here in Barbados. And these Barbadians took those same herbal treatments. So obviously, they may have been able to find these various herbs and bushes in the jungle, and they were accustomed to using them. So they used them in the absence of what we know today as modern medicines. So part of Barbadian culture was right there.
Right.
So you have
next slide here.
Yes, this is again you now this is when the Barbadian women were finally allowed to join their menfolk in Brazil, because in the initial stages you had a male Barbadian workforce working with men from other parts of the world. They had people from as far as Australia, United States, wherever, along with the Barbadians. And eventually, it was found out that the Barbadians had the necessary technical skills that could be used on the main railway site. So they allowed the Barbadians, they got the Barbadians to work in the workshops, and they got them also to build the buildings on the work site, the main work site. So that is how in the tongue of and now the city of Portobello really had its beginnings. Then the Barbadians started, setting up these buildings and everything, and they were allowed to build homes, their own hostel. So when the Barbadians built their homes, they built shuttle houses. So this is how the shuttle house thing came together. But these women came then after this settlement started to the work site took shape. They allowed the women to come, and many of the women worked in the laundry. So you see the laundry women working on the railway side.
Yeah, and actually, as a linguist, again, I'm looking for the language elements, and I see although in Brazil, in Portobello, English there, I see English up here, which seems to be like admittance or something like that written there as well.
Yes.
It's interesting, yeah. Okay.
A lot of significant number of as I said, the managers were English or American, and they felt comfortable working with these people who spoke their language.
Exactly. Okay. The next picture you have there is of the Madeira River.
Yes, and those Barbadians who have never seen a very large river would know that. I would see that it looks like a sea, a mini sea, but I mean, even my own experience going on it, and in a very small boat, as I was able to have the experience of going across the Madeira River into Bolivia, and I felt like it was in the ocean, and it was a very small boat with a lot of people in this boat. So it was,
and I have to mention here that the Madeira is just a tributary of the Amazon, right?
Of the Amazon, exactly.
At some points, the Amazon River, I always tell this my students, is broader than Barbados, right? So if you are on one side of the river, you barely see the other side because it's so broad, the river. Yeah, Yeah, so white, sorry, yeah. Okay. That might be an interesting experience, sailing in the Madeira into Malaysia.
Yes.
Oh, and there I see Frederick. What can you tell me about this picture?
Well, this picture is on my visit to my research visit to Portobello, and the families had me over at the church there, at the I think the Baptist church, and they had some nice food and everything there for me. And interestingly, it's the Johnson family. They still do sweetbread and fish like we do it in Barbados, and they have among themselves taught each other English. So they still speak some English in the Johnson family, especially. They're one of the families who have tried to preserve that aspect of the Barbadian culture. And so when they showed me, when they told me at least, they showed me the sweetbread and they showed me how they do the fish. It was very, very Barbadian. And how they cook the rice. And they're familiar with things like sugar cake and how we make our little sugar cakes, our candy. They try to keep those Barbadian traditions. And you
Actually,
also
Fred,
have,
that was one of the questions, and I would like to ask later, but I can ask it right now. So you're
yeah,
telling me that most of those descendants of Barbadians, they are, let's say today, Brazilianized, perhaps the majority. So
yes,
I understand when you say they speak some English, that the majority does not speak English anymore.
no.
And this is one of the questions: do they speak standard English or do they speak Bajan? And also, how did those Barbadians culturally adapt in Brazil, and what do you see today, apart from the food, that you could tell really, okay, this is not really purely Brazilian. There is some Bajan influence there. So what could you detect when you were there?
But let me first say, I was on the street and I was in the car traveling with the guy who was taking me around, and he's stopped by this guy who was walking along the street, and he said, "Look, this guy is a descendant of one of the Barbadian migrants." And as he spoke, even though he spoke in Portuguese, I I detected something Barbadian in how he said it. I don't know if I don't know. I don't know what you think about that as a linguist, but I detected some Barbarian accent in the way he said what he said, although he was speaking Portuguese. Um, as for how Barbadians have adapted, one of the things that Barbadians pride themselves in is this, especially older Barbadians. They pride themselves in having a significant respect for education. So when one looks at because a Brazilian academic did do a study of the Barbadians in Brazil, the Barbadian migrants and their descendants. And what was found is that very early on, and of course, you know, from the politics of Brazil, especially in the time of President Vargas, where there was a kind of a Brazilianization program, and people were mandated to speak Portuguese and things like that. The Barbadians basically had to start. They had their schools, they had English schools and everything in Portobello, but most of these schools had to be closed. So the Barbadians and in Belém. So what happened? Barbadians would teach English to their children in their homes in order to, to hide their identity, so to speak, their English identity. But what we found, or what the person who did the research found, I don't remember her name offhand, but I mentioned that in my thesis. She found that the Barbadians still provided education. So their children went to school, they learned Portuguese, and they did well in the Brazilian educational system. So the ladies who is facing us in this photograph, she is a professor at the University of Rondônia. So you find that, and in the Maloney, the Pisa family, you find highly educated professionals. Ursula Maloney, the lady, the gray-haired lady there. Wherever you go in Portobello, she is regal. She has taught generations of people in Portobello. So education was still very important for the Barbadians. So even though they had to make the change to Portuguese, they still made sure that their children were well educated. So even though they're a very small community, they're still, even today, and they had to face the whole sector of racism and everything else, and the fact that they were a strange culture, they were still able to make sure that they kept their educational standards up. So that was an important aspect of it. In Belém, you also found that Barbadians went to the Anglican Church. So you know Barbados is a significant Anglican society. So there's an St. Mary's Anglican Church in Belém. And in Portobello, where they did not have an Anglican church, there are Baptists. So that was the next best thing. And ironically, the Baptist church building there is built like a shuttle house. The old building is built like a shuttle house. So those things were part of the Barbadian cultural retention. A lot of the younger families, many of them are still learning English today. So there's still there's a revival to a certain extent in learning English and learning about it. So
okay,
I would say
and these, yes, and these people, when you talk to them, do they express a wish? Oh, I would like to know Barbadian, or I would like Barbadians to come here, or something like that, or do they not
yes.
want to foster connections?
No. There is great interest. The Maloney de Pisa family have visited Barbados. The Chase family from Manaus, they have come here a few times. I'm in constant contact with the Maloney de Pisa family. Nearly every 2 weeks or so we speak. So it is, and we have a Facebook page where we keep in contact, all the families. So there's not only in Portobello, but in Manaus and in Belém, there is that constant contact. So they're very interested in Barbados. They're always asking questions about Barbados, the follow things. So they're not at all ashamed of their Barbadian heritage.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that was my main question. If they still feel proud to have like a connection
Yes.
to Barbados, right? Okay. You have more pictures of people there. You want to go?
Well, you have 1 or 2 slides there of the Shockness family. Mr. Shockness was,
Mm-hmm.
yes, he used to work with the railway, and you see him here receiving an award from the city for his contribution to the railway. There are two slides with him, 2 or 3, and then you can go further down where you see the other one. You see here Senator John Wickham, and all the Barbadians would remember him. And Mr. Wickham was a regular contributor to the columns of the newspapers here in Barbados, and he made an early visit to the people in Portobello because obviously he knew of the Barbadians there. So and all the Barbadians in Portobello remember his visit also. So you had some contact over the years between people in Barbados and the descendants in Brazil. And the other slide, this is Ursula Maloney Pisa and her niece. And as you can see, she was a teacher in Portobello for over 50 years. Very well respected lady. And the family is, for those persons who are watching, who know Barbados, her family, her father is from St. Lucie in the area of Checker Hall and Sutherland Hill. And they
Okay,
have
so
been to Barbados.
she's the first generation of agents in Brazil,
Yes.
then.
In Brazil, yes.
Okay.
And this gentleman, he has a very significant place in Barbadian history. James Martineau. All the Barbadians would know of him as the manufacturer of a drink they call the Martineau soft drink. But he was also significant in Barbados's early development towards independence, and he would be very important in the political history of the Barbados Labour Party. But he originally was from Grenada, settled in Barbados finally, but he was also present in Cuba, maybe Panama also. He moved around a lot, and he went to Brazil, and he married a Guyanese in Brazil. And eventually he came back to Barbados after he tried to set up he had businesses in Brazil. He didn't try to, he had businesses in Brazil. He actually had a kind of this factory, which I again, in looking at some of the poetry that I was able to get my hands on, I found the address of his business place by using that poetry book. And it was at this place that apparently he had a factory that manufactured ice, and maybe I see the machinery is still there. It looked like he had some type of soft drink factory in Brazil first. So he then came back to Barbados and started manufacturing, doing the same thing in Barbados then. So his drinks became very popular in Barbados, and the older people would know of his drinks, Martineau soft drink.
Okay, Fred, I see now. I see. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. No, I was saying that he was also very involved in politics in Barbados also.
Okay. And I see some interesting pictures coming up of shuttle houses. You want to comment on them?
Yes. The shuttle houses. These pictures were taken by Professor Greenfield, an academic from the United States, who did some research on the Barbadian shuttle houses and the Barbadians in Brazil back in the 1970s. And so you can see very clearly the Barbadian homes in those days, especially the one, it's not a very good photo, but in those trees you can see very clearly that it's a Barbadian shuttle house. But
or
you
if I see
style,
this Baptist church here, I could say this could be like
any other
Barbados today,
building,
right?
Exactly. And the other one, even more interesting. That is the nice
This one?
story. That one. Again, when I was in Brazil, the Shockness family invited me over an evening, and we were discussing the shuttle houses. And they said, "But we have one in the backyard." So this is their original home, and they still have it preserved in their backyard. Well-preserved shuttle house. And this one, the pink one, that again, you see the shuttle house style, but not a Barbadian home. So Brazilians adopted the style, the building style, from the Barbadians in the area. So this is again a photo I took when I was there. So as you go along the railway line, the old railway line, you see some of these Barbadian style houses. And I didn't find any Barbadians living along there. But there you see the Brazilians using that style. And this one, this style, this house is many miles from Portobello, more close to the Bolivian border in Guajumarin. And I found that house very interesting also in that it looks like, you know, that the style influence building styles and that part of Brazil also. And this is just across the river from Bolivia. I took this photograph. So this is the same area. This is the area of the old railway, and close to where I took the picture of the shallow house. Of course, the railway is no longer working. So the next slide will show you the abandoned engine of the railway. Maybe the giving us one of those abandoned rail engines, and we can set it up somewhere in a museum here in Barbados as a reminder of that rail. They're all abandoned.
Actually a good idea there, right? So.
And here, of course, they have the railway museum, which is a very nice place to visit. Where this was the terminal of the railway, so they have turned it into a little museum right on the banks of the Madeira River. And this is the St. Mary's Anglican Church in Belém. And you find that a number of older Barbadians still go to that church. You have the younger Barbadians now have moved away and have now adopted Catholicism as their religion. But you will still find the first generation at that church, at St. Mary's Church. And this is the photograph of some of those persons who first settled in Brazil at the St. Mary's Church.
Okay. And I think this is the last picture. Not very clear,
that's the last. Yes, not a very good photograph, but that photograph is of a Brazilian researcher who wrote particularly on the Belém Barbadians and some of the older members of the St. Mary's, the Barbadians who are members of the congregation of the St. Mary's Anglican Church in Belém.
Okay, so our time is almost up, Fred, but now I want to ask you something that is not really related to your research, your beautiful research on the Barbadians that migrated to Brazil. You went to Brazil, obviously, to do some of your research and were there as a tourist as well. So what was your general impression in Brazil? Did you like it, not? What difficulties did you find? What can you say was nice? And what was your general impression as a Bajan traveling to Brazil? Not as a researcher, but as a Bajan citizen.
Well, I enjoyed I had 2 visits to Brazil, and okay. I enjoyed both visits. I love the Brazilian food, the people. It's a totally different culture, and I enjoyed the culture. Like every other place, Brazil has its issues, but I embrace the difference, and the fact that I mean, having a meal in Brazil means having a meal of various cultures all at once. That's one of the interesting things, and I'm sure you will attest to that, Marco. That food in Brazil, you know, is a journey in history. because you are getting a piece of all the various cultures present in Brazil. And that is one of the things I really enjoy, the churrasco and the way it's prepared, and the various other things, the soups. And I also enjoy I was in Sao Paulo, it is Rio, and visiting the Christ the Redeemer. It was fantastic view. But generally, and I also was able to visit what was the name? Where the former slaves settled, what do you call it? I'm trying to remember the Brazilian term.
Quilombo?
Yes, a Colombo.
Mm-hmm.
That was also very, very interesting also. So there is a lot to see. There's a lot to learn in Brazil. So not only as you said, as an academic, but as a visitor to Brazil, is and the Barbadian connection for me made it even more interesting, because we do have a long, rich historical connection to Brazil, and I will visit again tomorrow.
If you could, right? Same here.
Yeah.
So did you see any? Could you detect any similarities between Belgians and us in terms of culture, in terms of behavior, and so?
I think generally Brazilians are if there's one similarity will be the welcoming nature. I think that generally they're welcoming. I didn't spend a whole lot of time, so I mean, you know, that was my general impression, that people are relatively welcoming. I suppose in some ways they're a little conservative, like Barbadians also. So those little traits you find, but generally, you can feel comfortable in Brazil. I felt comfortable. I didn't feel in any way that, regardless of all the news you get, I didn't feel. Oh, and another interesting was the indigenous religions, looking at going to the favelas and seeing the Afro type religious presence in Brazil. Another very interesting thing. And again, it reminds us here in Barbados, even though it's more elaborate, of what we know the spiritual Baptist, but it's even stronger in Brazil. So there is, especially among the Afro population of Brazil, you'll find that those things that you can relate to in Barbados. So
right.
those are
okay.
things that
Yeah, interesting. I was interested in knowing about your impression on Brazil.
Yeah.
So Fred, now to wrap up, do you have anything you want to say regarding the research that you missed so far, or that you still have to say, or to summarize our conversation here today?
Well, there's a whole lot more to say on the research. I know we don't have the time, and I hope that persons who would have looked at the video will send their questions, and I will try to, between yourself and myself, we'll try to answer as many of the questions as we can. I am very happy about this initiative of yours, and in my way, with my contacts in Brazil, I try to keep up the momentum of the research that I did. So I'm looking forward to continuing to share about Barbados and Brazil, and keep the contacts up. So
right.
that is really what I would like to say. So I'm glad for this opportunity and to see that you're doing it.
Yes. So, and we thank you very much in the name of the Embassy of Brazil in Bridgetown and the Barbados Language Centre. I thank you for this conversation. It was very interesting, and we will actually, as you say, we will discuss more about the connections between Brazil and Barbados and Caribbean and Brazil in other sessions. So as I said, I should have said at the beginning, I forgot, so I mentioned it more or less in the middle. If you have any questions, because this session is recorded, please drop them in the comments of the YouTube video, and we will try to answer them. So that's it from us here today. Thank you very much, Frederick, Aline. I hope we have more opportunities in the future to discuss this topic. And I say to you all, have a good night. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you.
Okay.